on my mind.
Hello and welcome to episode 26 of The Boxing Show with me, your host Rob Tebbutt. As always, I'd like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, I am joined this week by, well, a WBO champion of sorts, not the former WBO super featherweight champion of the world, Mr. Barry Jones, but none other than the current WBO cruiserweight champion, Mr. Chris Billam-Smith, and, well, Andy, he's here every week, so he doesn't get the big intro that Chris does.
WBO champion of sorts. I mean, what's that? That's a, you know.
This is the official WBO chair. We can only do the podcast now with WBO champions. So if any WBO champions who are watching this and want to get on the boxing show, just comment underneath. But hello, Chris.
Hello, mate.
Nice to have you in.
Thanks for having me.
Your second trip to the boxing show as a boxing show panelist. Must be a huge moment in your professional career.
It's up there. It's up there with the highlights of the year.
Before we jump into things, how have you been? Obviously a few months removed now from your world title win. Still waiting for news of your return. But how's it all going? How's life in the world of Chris Billam-Smith?
Yeah, all good. Just ticking over, staying, I sort of died down now, and in just in my head, it's about what's next, and the team are working on that and having conversations, and I'm just ticking away in the background. It's
very tempting, teasing. The team are working along in the background. Anything that you can tell us, Chris? Any pearls of wisdom? Any exclusives for the boxing show?
No, nothing at the moment.
I'm so glad that
I'll probably be fighting end of this year in Bournemouth, which you probably already knew.
Yeah, it's not really an exclusive. But anyway, Andy, can you tell us any exclusive news at all? What have you been up to?
I don't think I've got any exclusives for you. It's interesting, the cruiserweight scene, isn't it? Just watching what's been going on over the last few weeks. It's certainly been front and centre in a lot of ways. All this business with Riakporhe and Opetaia and Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom and Frank Smith. They haven't wasted any opportunities, Team Matchroom, to make their feelings known. I think we've maybe got a little bit too much of that at the minute. Well, we talked about this a few times, haven't we? The back and forth between promotional houses, a lot of stones being thrown, and to an extent I get it, because if you get asked about it, then you're going to have to say something, particularly if you feel like you can score some points. But the person who really entertains me most in the middle of it all is Frank Warren, who just kind of every now and again he just kind of like slides into view under the guise of kind of, well, I'm just answering questions, lobs out a few grenades and then just kind of exits stage left, having caused some absolute havoc. But it is quite entertaining. But I will be with the cruisers. It'll be interesting to see how that does all shake out. I mean, Opetaia, Jordan Thompson is something we're now hearing, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, from my point of view, disappointed that that's not that. Richard isn't happening, because if he beat Opetaia, that's a huge fight for me. One, for a world title, unifying world titles would have been amazing.
With all of this stuff going on, because I mean, we are a few months removed now from the Okolie fight. I think in the last 2 or 3 months, we've seen you linked with the Okolie rematch, Richard Riakporhe, Jai Opetaia. I mean, I think you were calling out Oleksandr Usyk on Sky, but we'll leave that one because he's got a fight this weekend. How is it for you when all of this is circling on? You've seen all of these names, all of these rumours, all of these purse bids and all of these things happening. Does it bother you at all? Are you frustrated at all? Do you want any sort of clarity, or are you thinking, I've got my world title, I'll fight whoever?
Yeah, I mean, I'm annoyed because the Richard fight for unification is huge. And you want big fights, another big domestic fight for another world title. But obviously, he's got that split decision winner against me as well. So I'd love to do that. But for me, I'm not just going to, he had opportunities to fight me before I had a world title. So, and now I've got other people to fight, There's talk of Masternet, there's talk of Lawrence, which I think at the moment have been the front runners. But I just don't... The most frustrating thing is you've got yourself into a position of, by Masternet taking a step back, getting yourself into mandatory, and then because he's got a new promoter and you don't want to go to Australia as the challenger, like, you just... Don't get me wrong, I know I said that before in that interview about me not wanting to go over there, but it's because the whole fight was getting billed previously for months and months and months about Opetaia coming to over here to fight me. But, you know, anyway. But at the same time, I've got a world title and I've got my own path, and I'm in a better position than, you know, than a lot of cruiserweights in this country, because, well, I'm in the best position out of all cruiserweights in this country. But yeah, it can be frustrating with that, because I really wanted Richard to go and beat Opetaia. I deal with my business in the meantime, and then we get it on next year for unification. But that's at the moment not looking the most likely, unless he can go and fight Gulamirian instead.
Andy's just mentioned there, we are hearing Jordan Thompson now as a potential opponent for Jai Opetaia. What do you make of that fight?
Yeah, Jordan's massive for the weight, huge. I'm actually surprised he's still at the weight. But I had him in for beginning of my last camp. But then he had a fight and a little niggle, I think, after, so he can carry on sparring, unfortunately, because 6'7" or whatever he is, long levers, good right hand, good power, it's perfect for Lawrence. But he can, like I said, he can whack. He's really grew over the years. I've sparred him a few years ago. He's becoming a lot better. He's letting his hands go a bit more and stuff. He's got a puncher's chance against Opetaia, but you'd have to make Opetaia a huge favourite if that fight goes ahead, because of what he's also done. But I think if there's a time to fight Opetaia, I think it's now, because he's had such a long layoff. He's had issues outside the ring. We're not sure how he lives outside the ring, because he got arrested, I think, for being drunk and disorderly. Could have been one off, whatever. But I think now's the time. I mean, hopefully Jordan can go and win it, and, you know, makes the British cruiserweight scene even more exciting.
It's coming off that broken jaw as well for the Myron Bradis fight, so it may well be. But enough about you, Chris. We are here, of course, to talk about the boxing, and namely this last weekend. You mentioned there, antagonist-in-chief Frank Warren as the promoter of this. So he's kind of Frank Warren, sort of like the guy at school who's like goes in between the guys and goes, "Oh, mate, he said this about you," and then goes to the other one and goes, "Oh, have you heard this?" And then just watches gleefully in the background as Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom kick 7 barrels of shit out of each other. But anyway, this past Friday, Andy, at the Spit and Sawdust, the home of British boxing, York Hall, I think we all sat here and we all expected a tough night's work for Dennis McCann against Baluta, and a tough night's work is what he got.
Yeah, it was. It's one of those matches that I was in favour of at the time. In retrospect, you look at it and wonder whether it was the wisest thing to do, but that it's always easy to, you know, just do that whole kind of Monday morning quarterback thing. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the whole card was really, really good. I think TNT Sports have had a great start, actually. You look at Spence Crawford, and they had that show in Telford the same night with Liam Davis and Jason Cunningham, wasn't it? That was a good show. And McCann maybe slightly fortunate to escape with the draw, but it was a good fight to watch. It was a really good fight to watch. And Baluta, his recent record is very good. You know, it's not like he hasn't won fights. He's won 4, drawn 1, lost 2. So it's not the case that he's kind of lost most of them, but has maybe deserved a little bit better. You know, he's managed to get them over the line. And he will ask you serious questions. If you reckon you're at kind of British title level or beyond, then he will give you a very, very stern examination. He's not the best technically himself, but if you've got any deficiencies in that department, he'll find them out. You know, if you pull out with your chin high, you'll be in trouble. If you just pull back in straight lines, it'll keep coming and coming and coming, and close that gap quick, and you'll be in trouble. You know, he's. We were talking before. I'd love to see him in the home corner at some point. I think he's earned it. You know, why not? You know, he's a kind of honorary Brit in boxing terms these days, isn't he? So, yeah, it was when it was stopped, I was wondering to myself, I didn't score it round by round, but I was thinking this is definitely close. It could come down to how they scored that incomplete round, which was definitely Baluta's round, but then Bob Williams scored it Baluta's way. But the two European judges, I don't know whether they didn't really know that they're required to find a winner in that incomplete round, because they both just gave it a draw, which made me think that they probably didn't really know what they were supposed to do, because I mean, Baluta won that incomplete round and there was enough of it to make a clear judgment on it, to be honest. And if they had gone his way with it, then obviously he'd have won, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would have. He would have won by split decision. So, yeah, the two European judges both had it even. But you are supposed to score an incomplete round, as we know. Spoke to John Pegg, big up John Pegg, after the fight, and he pointed out the fact that between them, they had about 60 fights, the judges. They'd not actually had fights. They'd judged about 60 fights. Could have had more than 60 fights outside the ring. I don't know, some of these judges are wild. But
it is a problem, that, though, because the Border Control get criticised for plenty of things, but I think one thing you cannot criticise them for is the schooling and the grounding that the officials get, because you would never get near. I look at how long it takes them to judge or referee world title fights, and it's hundreds of fights, hundreds. Whereas in other parts of the world, you can get stuck on a European title fight almost straight away. And it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up to me anyway. But here, you just got to go through that process of 4-rounders, 6-rounders, 8-rounders, 10-rounders. It'll be a good while before you'll get your hands on, say, an area title fight where the ref also scores it, and it's his single score that counts. So that's one thing I think we absolutely do get right over here. It doesn't mean that people don't return scores that you don't agree with. That happens. That will always happen, but you really do have to put the spade work in before you get let loose on a big fight, and it's just not the same in other jurisdictions.
Chris, we sat here last week. Not we, you weren't here. Barry Jones, we got Barry. We sat here last week.
Where is he anyway?
So he's camping. Which anyone who knows Barry knows how hilarious that is. He's just like
he won't be enjoying that.
He's trudging around somewhere, effing and blinded to high heaven is where he is at the minute. But Chris, we sat here. We all kind of looked at this as a potential banana skin for Dennis McCann. Obviously, McCann has been given a good push by BT, well, formerly BT and now TNT Sports. Baluta is that guy who kind of, if you're not at it, he will show you up. What did you make of the performance from McCann and from both of them on Friday night?
Yeah, it's the sort of fight where I think it's perfect matchmaking. I was thinking about this on the way up this morning, rewatching the fight, and I was thinking it's the perfect fight, Baluta, for McCann at this stage, but you have to take in all the different variables of matchmaking, and that goes to knowing your fighter from a coach/manager point of view more than a promoter, because a promoter doesn't know what goes into everything. Now, the fight's at York Hall, and you've got a slick southpaw, tricky southpaw, who's not got his man strength yet. Still strong kid, Dennis, but not got his man strength. And then you've got Baluta, who comes forward, wings in hooks, gets strong as the fight goes on. Now, if you've been to York Hall for a show, or you've boxed there, if you're headlining, you're there for a few hours before in that humidity. Even in the changing rooms, it's hot. And then when you get out into the ring in there at a full York Hall, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, let alone it being summer. It is roasting, and that affects the fight. We've seen it. It was a boxer show not long ago where we saw it. There was a few flat performances, on the show. Hassan and Caroline boxed on it, and there was a few flat performances on that, and that's because of the heat and the humidity in there. And you've got to take that into account when you're matching someone like Dennis McCann with someone like Baluta. Any other venue, I mean, for me, Baluta won the last 3 rounds, scoring the round that got stopped, and he's coming on strong. So he probably would have won the fight if it had gone to scorecards anyway. But I did have it. To be fair, I scored it very, very close. And one of the rounds I could have given a draw, but I didn't want to, so I gave it to McCann, and so that gave McCann the nod. But I wouldn't argue with it. I'm not a judge, so you can't argue with it going the other way by a round or even 2. But I think that is perfect fight, but the wrong venue. And I think that it matters. And I think that's something that when you're matching someone at York Hall who's young and you're trying to build, like a perfect fight, because even if he loses against Baluta, he's going to learn from it. But obviously his stock might dip a little bit. But if he wins, you know he's going to have earned the win because it's Baluta and he makes you work for a win. But when it's at York Hall, it's just that it adds a lot more when you've got that type of fighter like Baluta who just comes forward, wings shots, gets strong as the fight goes on, against a lad who's young, inexperienced as such, and is that sort of style of fight. He doesn't want to have a physical fight, and it's going to drain him in a physical fight. And then you stick York Hall in August on that, and that's going to be even more of a factor. And you're looking for every advantage as a trainer manager for your fighter. That's giving it an advantage, a massive advantage to Baluta, just because of the venue itself. So do that fight, do it in a different venue, ideally. And I think you'll see a slightly fresher McCann, because the ring's always small as well in York Hall because of the size of the venue. Dennis, he's a mover, he's a slick southpaw, he's got bundles of ability and skill, but you're pushing the ball, you're pushing the advantages slightly to Baluta by doing that. But I thought he started well, but he started fading. McCann got hit a few times, and I thought he was just doing enough to nick a lot of the round. For the third round, I think Baluta came out.
That's where he got hurt in the third round.
Absolutely, winging and hurt him, and that took a lot out of him. And the venue and the heat will make it worse when you get hit of a shot and you get buzzed, and it takes a bit out of your legs. Where you are and the surroundings are going to have an effect on that as well. But yeah, and then Baluta just does what he always does and just grows into a fight and just wings away. He found, but he had a few rounds off. I thought, he was very patient at times, and then there was so difficult to score. But I was giving a lot of the early rounds to McCann, other than the third, because of his jab. He was jabbing really well early on, which he sort of neglected as the fight went on. Because he's got a really good, decent long jab, and it just, someone like Baluta, you can just offset him with it, and I think he did that well to begin with. But obviously as the fight went on, he got hurt, he got cut, that affected him, and just the momentum of the fight changed a little bit. And then obviously round 7, 8 and 9, Baluta was comfortably winning them, even though the ninth was however long it was. Don't know how long it was, 40 seconds or something. Yeah, but Baluta was on top, so you got to score it to him if you got to score that round. So yeah, I think as expected from Baluta, the fight as a whole was probably as expected. And then you chuck in, like I said, a factor of York Hall, and it makes a difference. It really does.
That's a good point about the venue. Yeah. I've not thought of that, but actually, it is roastingly hot, and we always say it, and I'm always mindful now of saying it on the broadcast because it's probably a bit boring to hear, but it's just true. That show in June that Caroline boxed on, you could see that performances
was like really hot.
You could see that performances were different, and it is just, I don't know, there's something about it. It's not just the heat. It's, as you described it earlier, you get there quite early, and it's like as soon as you're sucked into that vortex, there's no escape. And it starts to sap your energy the minute you walk through the door, probably. And it is what it looks like on TV, just this kind of epicenter amongst this baying mob. And I love it. I absolutely love it. But I think that place probably runs your battery down quicker than maybe anywhere else you'd box.
As a fan, it's a phenomenal venue. As a fighter, you want to tick it off because it's legendary, but once it's ticked off, I'm done with that. I got to tick it off in my worst performance to date against Robin Dupree.
Oh, that was a long fight
on the Bacoli Hunter undercard. I only went 5 rounds and I was done. But I was on, chief support to the main event, and there was a 12-rounder of Lee McGregor against Thomas Asomba, which he stopped him in the 12th, and the atmosphere in there is you can hear it, and then the noise, the energy, and it just gets so hot in there, so hot. Even when I've commentated there before or been there to watch shows, it's just so humid, and you just can't shake it, and you see it all the time. With fights there, you see people underperforming, and that's a huge reason for it. I remember when I boxed Nathan Thorley outside, and it was a roasting hot day, and my nutritionist was like, don't go outside today. Obviously we had about, I don't know, 20 square meters of outside we were actually allowed to go into because it was during COVID, we're in the bubble, but he was like, don't go outside, it's too hot, like just stay in your room, stay cool, because all that will sap the energy. Me and Shane we were like, we'll do a couple of laps of field because we like to do a walk on fight day. We did one lap, walked outside, I was like, I'm doing one lap. We did one lap of this fence and it took a whole probably 90 seconds, went back inside, laid down, chilled out. And that's something you know, when you're trying to peak and perform to your best, you've got to consider. And York Hall's one of them. You probably want ice packs at the ready, you know, all the time on the back of the neck, in the changing rooms, trying to stay cool. It's so difficult to do that, especially in that venue.
We are going to move on because we've got a few bits to get through from this past weekend before we talk about Usyk Dubois. But there was a draw. It was controversial in some instances. I had Baluta winning the fight. It was a close fight, but I did think Baluta won. Do you think we see a rematch? Would you advise a rematch if you were in the Dennis McCann business?
Yeah, I would, because it's hard to, like, it's a draw. It's not like a loss where you can just brush it on the carpet and move on. Like, you can almost do that easier with a loss. With a draw, it's more difficult, and maybe change the venue. I think Dennis is going to learn more than Baluta would from that fight, and that experience of, I know he only just went into the 9th round, but he'd only gone 8 before, I think. But just that training for a 10-round camp, you just feel like a whole new fighter when you start completing a whole camp, and, you know, in that venue, he'll feel fitter today than he did, you know, ever before, because he's done it and the experience is invaluable. And you'd like to think with that style and a good boxing brain that you can make the adjustments you need to. And that's what you want to see in how you develop a fighter well, is putting him in those sort of fights. That's why it's a good fight to make, because he'll learn from it regardless. You could give him a fight in the meantime, which might help him. But yeah, it's a tough one, because you almost, it's Baluta in that weight division sort of become the man to the gatekeeper for the next level. So, and I think they were trying to make the Liam Davies fight, but that fight's, you know, you're going to favour Liam Davies beating McCann now, because of he got a draw and obviously Davies beat him. But yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. As a manager, you probably not. But as a development for your fighter, then if you're going to reach the top, then yes, you've got to do the rematch.
Andy, what do you think? You mentioned there briefly about us discussing beforehand about seeing Baluta as the home fighter would be nice after all of his exploits in the away corner. Chris just spoke there about Liam Davies seemingly waiting in the wings for Dennis McCann. Of course, already beat Baluta pretty handily as well. I don't think we've seen anybody handle Baluta in that way. Do you think we should see a rematch? Do you think we will see a rematch?
I think we probably will. I definitely feel like McCann will want it, and he won't have necessarily the final say, but we believe he was a big driving force behind the fight in the first place. So he'll definitely want to do it again. And I do think that they will feel that he's at the point in his career where doing it again is actually the right thing for him, that there wouldn't be any other better option for him. They'll be confident, I think, that he'll take a lot from it and be better the next time. And yeah, maybe the venue is something to think about. You know, get it on an undercard somewhere else. I don't know what the plans are for Liam Davies next, but maybe on the undercard of whoever he fights next. You know, that would make sense, wouldn't it? I mean, he was there on Friday. So was Jason Cunningham. He was Davis was sat behind Cunningham, and I like Davis. I think he's just a really good kind of story, and exactly the kind of fighter that promoters are looking for a bit more now, but not that dissimilar to Chris, where, you know, you can sell loads of tickets in your hometown. There's an enormous amount of value in that, and Davis is that guy, isn't he? You know, that's a good venue they've got for him in Telford. So that whole scene is an appealing one. And McCann, he's an impatient kind of a guy, because everybody is when they're young, and he did turn pro young without any senior experience, and we've talked about that before. And I agree that he's not quite got that man strength yet. Physically, he kind of looks almost different to me every time I see him, which is good, but he is still he's still like 21, isn't he?
He's 22, I think.
Yeah, or something like that. And I think they brought him along at the right pace. And yeah, I think the rematch is inevitable, and I think it's the right thing to do.
I think it's inevitable. I'm not sure it happens next.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be next.
But I think they will do it again. But I'd like to see Baluta in the home corner. I'd like to see him get a sort of fair crack. Not that he didn't get a fair crack at the whip at the weekend. Well, depending on who you speak to. But
he had some fans there as well the other night.
Yeah,
I mean, a few Romanian.
Yeah.
They were loud. I don't know how many were there, but they were definitely loud.
Yeah, it could have been 10 of them there. They'd have been pretty loud, I'd imagine. But yeah, he's a very likeable guy, very likeable fighter. He's easy to root for, isn't he, Baluta?
Yeah.
Because he turns up every time and he gives it a go. You know what you're going to get from him. I did feel like he was slightly unfortunate. But I'm sure we'll see him again very, very soon. Okay, over to Saturday night and Birmingham for the return of former Olympic gold medalist, reigning Olympic gold medalist for the time being, Jalalov Ajagba-Kossobutskiy, who mowed down Tommy Frank in about a minute and a half, Andy. Again, we all sat here and predicted a stoppage win for Jalalov Ajagba-Kossobutskiy. Didn't predict it that early. I did get the earliest, but we didn't predict it that early. But yeah, it looked like a bit of a mismatch on paper, didn't it? And I think our worst fears were realised. Well, certainly Tommy Frank's worst fears were realised pretty early in the first round.
Yeah, and it was impressive because, as you say, it was a fight that he was expected to win, Yafai, and you expected him to win it fairly handily, and he himself was certainly of the opinion that there was a gulf in class between the pair of them, and he demonstrated that, and he couldn't really have demonstrated it any more ably than he did. So full marks to him for it, really. It was a job very well done, and there's not really an enormous amount to say about it, to be honest, is there? It was over before, a lot of people had probably sat down.
Yeah, he went there, he let the left hand go straight away. Before you knew it, Tommy Frank was down. He was being beckoned to get up by Galal, which was nice to see that little bit of spite from him. What did you make of Galal's performance, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, like Andy said, not much you can say. White didn't get hit, really, just wiped the guy out, wiped Frank out, really. But I love Galal. Like, I spoke to him years ago. I think it was him and his brothers, lovely family, like real down-to-earth people, humble people. So to see Galal like beckoning him up, like you said, is nice, because that's him expressing himself. That's him in the ring, but he's not that character outside the ring. He's not brash, but you want him. He's a good guy outside the ring, and inside he's an absolute savage. And that's something I like to try and be, is be a savage in the ring and entertaining in the ring, and carry yourself well outside of it. And I think he does that really well. And he just from the off, every fight he's had, I remember I think his debut was on Lawrence's undercard against Sislak, and he just he had this guy in there, and it's just non-stop the way he fights, and just creates angles, very strong upper body. He's quite tall, sometimes his chin's a bit in the air, but he just walks through people with a high guard and just lets his hands go, and it's always exciting. Never looks like he's going to stop throwing punches. His work rate his punch output must be huge. Like, if you see it throughout a fight, a huge punch output, and I think at that weight, that's what you want to see, and that's how you're gonna get stoppages. And yeah, I like I say, I'm a big fan of Galal. Was buzzing for him when he won gold, and a lovely lad to go with it. Andy,
naturally in boxing, Jalalov Ajagba-Kossobutskiy wasn't out of the ring yet before people had started talking about world title fights and unification, all of that sort of stuff that everybody likes to get carried away with in the immediate aftermath, of course. But he is in kind of like I wouldn't say tricky position, a good position, obviously, but matchmaking wise, I mean, there was much made about him making his professional debut. He boxed 10 rounds. We said this last week. He boxed 10 rounds on his debut against a 6-round opponent. It wasn't a 10-round opponent. Then he had a very close shave out in Abu Dhabi on the Bivol Zerdo card, I think it was. And he's kind of now found himself, I mean, with respect to Tommy Frank, kind of just below British level. Obviously, I think they tried to make the Jay Harris fight. Seems as though that could potentially be next for him. Is that sort of the right career path? I know they're talking about potentially a slot on the Sonny Edwards, Bam Rodriguez undercard. If that's the case, probably not going to be a Jay Harris, because I don't think that really makes much sense. You probably want an international opponent. But where next for him, and how far do you think he is away from those big fights at flyweight?
I'd like that Jay Harris fight for him next, I think, to be honest, because he's been a European champion, Jay, hasn't he? And
box for a world title.
Against Martinez. Put up a pretty good performance that night. I think people gave him a lot of plaudits for that, correctly, because he showed that he is very tough, but he's also a technically good fighter. So I think that is kind of the perfect step for him, because it's an easy sell for a British card. Not so much like you say if they were going to put it on the undercard of Sonny against Rodriguez, but the perfect guy is right there, and it's for a British title, and there's not a fighter in the whole of the UK who doesn't want to win a British title. So that would seem to me to be the obvious thing to do, because you don't always get that. Sometimes you find yourself in a position where you then have to make quite a big leap, and there's not all that much you can do about it, particularly in the lower weights. That can happen, can't it? You move quick and you get a few under your belt, and then they just kind of have to throw you in, and that can be a bit dangerous. And that's kind of, you could argue, what happened with Jay Harris with Martinez, and people were kind of looking at that and wincing a bit, I think, at the time. But obviously, he stepped up and he did well. But that kind of bridging fight, all respect to Harris, who could beat Yafai if Yafai's not, really on his game. I think it is the kind of perfect for him, really, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Tom Dallas, matchmaker, the next day. We were talking about potential opponents. But I mean, Eddie after the fight, it's quite funny. Eddie after the fight mentioned Sarissa Quetzal-Rungvisai and Carlos Cuadras as potential bridging fights, both at bantamweight now. So we'll go back to the flyweight division and think about who could potentially be next for the flyweight. Andres Campos, obviously boxed for a world title last time out.
Such a great passive-aggressive little dig, isn't it?
Hi, Eddie.
I love it.
But like someone like a Jason Mama, someone like who's boxed at. Because if you have to think international opponent now, like Israel Gonzalez, obviously went the distance with both Chocolatito and Bam Rodriguez.
I mean, I'm always thrown out there Carmona for him, because they boxed in the amateurs.
I was going to say,
there's a good
and
rivalry
he's boxed on Matchroom cards as well.
And he boxed Martinez for a world title as well, didn't he? Not that long ago.
Yeah, he boxed well in that fight.
Yeah, and that's maybe a. I think before his last fight, or maybe after his last fight, I threw that out, and it was probably a bit too soon. I think you and Barry were thinking, not right now. That's probably a bit too much of a jump. But with every fight he has, it becomes less of a jump, and there's just that little bit of history there with it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with him, because I think we've had this conversation a few times about various different prospects. I know both him and Fraser Clarke obviously extensive amateur careers, but still prospects. It's kind of not defined by age, but I have to be careful how I word this. A lot of these prospects are being paid very well. Like, they're being paid very well, all credit to them, but it does come with the kind of the double-edged sword that we've seen recently, whereas promoters aren't always ready to risk that investment by stepping them up too quick too soon.
And you can't box them, like, you boxed like 4 times in the first 4 weeks, didn't you, or something like that? Or 4 times in 4 weeks.
11 weeks.
That was it, 4
fights in 11
and they
weeks.
were in this real cluster, and I think maybe you boxed 11 times in your first year, or I don't know whether that's... Anyway, you were active, weren't you?
Yeah,
in a way that if you're having to pay somebody a lot of money every time they fight, you can't put them on that often. It's just as simple as that.
I wasn't paid well enough, obviously.
Moving on in Birmingham, one fight that did catch fire on the undercard, and one fight that we're not going to see now, unfortunately, is Cyrus Pattinson and Lewis Ritson. It's the fight we're not going to see, but the fight we did see this weekend, Chris, was Cyrus Pattinson versus Conor Walker. The 7-1 underdog went in there, and he was 7-1 underdog, 20-1 by stoppage at Bet365. Big up Bet365. Giving a lot of shout outs today here on the Boxing Show, but it's all right. We're happy today on a Monday. But great performance from Conor Walker, and really dominated the fight after the third round, really, where Pattinson was hurt by that right hand. It was, I wouldn't quite call it one-way traffic. It was a very good fight, but Walker was always in the ascendancy from that point. Yeah,
he always looked in control from that point, and even when Pattinson was sort of letting his hands go, he had a little bit, I can't remember what round it was, but where he sort of put a good barrage of punches together against Walker and was catching him quite clean, and sort of the crowd sort of erupted a little bit, you know, because he's in the home corner as such. So like you see Eddie start jumping up and down because that's his fighter. But Walker always looked sort of comfortable enough, never looked in enough trouble, whereas Soris looked like he was boxing out of himself after he got hurt. And I really like Soris. I always have. Quiet lad, you know, similar to Galal, very humble lad, and you know, he can fight, but it was caught up a bit in what to do. He was like, should I be on the back foot? But then Walker's just taking the space, and then should I fight him and have a little bit of success there? Then he get caught at the end of an exchange, and he looked a little bit caught in two minds of how to approach it after he got hurt. But yeah, Walker boxed really well. Like I said, very calm and sort of calculated in his approach, and found that obviously that first right hook that done most of the damage early on. But really good fight. I think it grew into a really, really good fight, and I'd definitely watch it again. That's for sure. But I can't see it happening again.
I think we might see it again, because now, I mean, we spoke about it briefly beforehand. Lewis Ritson, who was the most down in the face man in the entire arena, probably apart from Cyrus Pattinson on Saturday night, turned up with his Newcastle shirt on, ready to announce an all Northeast. It's always bad luck when that happens. Whenever you see that, you think, okay, something could potentially happen here. We spoke about it beforehand. Last time Matchroom did a show in that arena, Sam Egginton got stopped by a certain Hassan Joaquinho a couple of weeks out from his bout with Brandon Rios. Birmingham has a funny way, and boxing indeed has a funny way of ruining even the best laid plans. But it looks as though, certainly from Eddie Hearn's comments after the fight and everything else that we're kind of reading into it, we could now end up with Lewis Ritson versus Pat McCormack in Newcastle, Andy.
Yeah.
I don't love that.
No, I mean, I kind of do in a way, because they'll sell a lot of tickets for that. And you look at Ritson's body of work as a pro, the best stuff came at lightweight, as we know, then stepped up to super lightweight. He's now at welter. I don't really feel like that's necessarily the best thing for him, but it must have happened for a reason. But McCormack it's funny, he hasn't had the fanfare turning pro that he should have had, because he signed with Pro Bellum and that was short-lived, but obviously it took some extricating from, and now he's with Matchroom. He's so good. You ask anybody about him and they'll all tell you the same thing, which is that he's going to move quick in what is obviously a very, very competitive division, and I don't see it ending well for Lewis, that fight. But then again, this is a brutal business, and if you're looking to build McCormack, which Matchroom are, then this is exactly what you want to do. You want to make that fight, because that would be a statement, to beat somebody and beat him comprehensively, which is what I think would happen. Someone who's got those credentials, albeit at a different weight, it means something. And McCormack's in that kind of situation a little bit similar to the one we described with Yafai, although there's a lot more depth in that division, is in that to progress him is not necessarily going to be the easiest thing in the world. You've either got to take a leap at some point, or you're going to have to get your checkbook out. It's not easy. It's not easy, because McCormack's just a classic example of someone who's high risk, no reward if you're above him in the rankings.
Yeah, I mean, it's with all due respect to Lewis Ritson, it's a fight I don't really like, because I think that at 135 we saw towards the end of his 135 sort of the Patera fight obviously being the prime example of him just not being as robust as he was when he blasted his way through domestic level. And then at 140, I think Miguel Vasquez, I thought, was very, very unfortunate not to get the decision win over him. Ahara Davis obviously stopped him as well. I just think that a fully fledged world-class amateur, and we expect him to certainly be there or thereabouts as a pro in Pat McCormack, this stage of Lewis Ritson's career. I think that's a really hard night for him. But as you correctly,
you're being thrown to the wolves by your promoter. That's no bones about it. That's what's happening. But that's the game.
That's sacrificing a pawn, isn't it?
Yeah,
to advance your pawn, and that's what that is, and it's horrible. It's a horrible business, but if he's going to take it, I hope he's paid well and looked after by his team, if that's the case. Because, like Andy said, we all agree that you'd expect McCormack to get through him within 3 to 4 rounds. And it's just like, what does that even tell us about Pat? Really? Like, it's a name. That's it. It's not... And if he doesn't do that, it's like, well, is he as good as we thought he was? So it's sort of a no-win situation for McCormack, unless... Because what's expected of him is to blow him out there round 1, round 2, round 3, or round 4. Even round 4's pushing it, probably. And if he doesn't do that... If he does do that, it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're meant to do that, but you've got a name on your record. And obviously, it's a big fight in the Northeast, and that's kind of the only reason it's probably really happening, is it's do good numbers up there, do good tickets, and hopefully Eddie's probably looking at transferring a few of those fans over from Ritson to McCormack. But yeah, it's hard as a boxer to just look at a fighter just get chucked in sort of just a... But that's how the game works a lot of the time. You know, people at the end of their careers, you get fed to the next ones coming through. And it happens, has done in the past, will happen again in the future. But yeah, I just don't see it as anything to gain from that fight from a fan's point of view, unless you're at the event for the atmosphere, or even McCormack's team, other than the name. But are the names that important? Like, if you're actually progressing as a fighter, if he's in a slightly harder fight and he learns more, like, are you actually losing out on anything because it's not a name? You know, that's...
And it's certainly a name that doesn't really bear much fruit on the world level at welterweight.
No, it's a difficult balancing act, isn't it? Because, the career progression as opposed to marketability and the commercial side of it, it's tricky because, you know, Chris mentioned earlier the show we had on Sky at your call in June, where it was going to be Azim, and then he couldn't headline, and then Fraser headlined in what was an important developmental fight against Marius Vac, but not one for that reason that really worked as being top of the bill. But you can't just... It can't all just be lights, camera, action, can it? You know, those fights have to be had, and
you have to have some substance.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, you can absolutely see why, if you're Eddie, you would... Ritson for McCormack is kind of come on, let's
from a business point of view.
And maybe, like you say, transfer some of those fans over, because when you're an elite international amateur, you basically just never box at home ever. So you don't really, you don't end up doing what he's been able to do, because you're this kind of like Harlem Globetrotter. You don't
be a good enough amateur is the key.
Well, and also I always feel like kind of in recent history as well, I think we have, as British boxing fans, been spoilt a little bit, and certainly seen the fact that, you know, that great class of 2012, it was a home games. The games took over the whole country, the whole of the UK.
Yeah.
Whereas,
exactly,
I mean, I felt this about the 2016 Olympians as well. I remember watching them in the middle of the night. But certainly for the COVID games, like, they really didn't have that fanfare when they turned over.
And it'd be great with Galal if they... I do think, we said it last week, I do genuinely think that Birmingham is an underused city for boxing, because you can kind of use it as a hub for not just Birmingham fighters, but fighters who are like near enough.
Midlands,
Yeah, exactly. And there's plenty of them. And if they could really, and that's obviously the plan, you know, really just kind of push him forward as that Birmingham name. We went there with Sky at the start of May, and you know, Resorts World out by the airport. You know, it's kind of just self-contained and all there and ready to go. But there's other arenas, so yeah, I think they need to, but they do need help with that. The Olympians, and they want to try and do it with Whittaker as well. And it's really important that you do it, because otherwise you just end up boxing on other people's undercards.
You become a man without a country.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Okay, well, before we move on, talk about an impressive professional debut. Ibraheem Sulaimaan, lightweight, made a pretty big splash on his debut, getting rid of Mikhail Gonchi is a difficult name to pronounce anyway. In the first round, somebody who went 6 rounds of Campbell Hatton, obviously went down to the gym 3-4 weeks ago, Princess of Brum, check it out on Boxing News. just to kind of see really, because it was kind of like the gym setup is you've got Spencer McCracken Jr., of course, of the McCracken family. You've got Jaykae, kind of Birmingham rapper. Adam Hamed, his dad used to box, I think. I don't know. And then Ibraheem Sulaimaan, who's kind of a very young, clean-cut Muslim, very respectful young man. And it's kind of like you've got 4 people from they're sort of connected in one way, but not quite. I'm kind of selling the feature that we did here. Go and watch it. It's great. But what we got, I think, from Sulaimaan at the weekend was very impressive, Andy. I think it was, as far as professional debuts go, I think it ticked a lot of boxes.
Yeah, it did. It did. I saw Jaykae a few weeks ago, met him for the first time at the launch of the Box Off, which is something I'm involved in. So he's Birmingham team captain. And I kind of introduced myself and, just asked him what his boxing background was. And we all of a sudden we're having a long conversation about all sorts. He's really, really into it. Into the amateur side of it, knows exactly what's going on at all levels around his patch. So I love that. I love that because you need that, I think. And he adds that little bit of, like you say, sort of local stardust to it, because like you were with him the other week and you were telling me that, you walk around Birmingham with him and everybody knows who he is. He's famous in what is a big, big city. So that attracts a good spotlight to the gym. And it is an interesting setup. And he was telling me all about Spider and what a good fighter he feels that he can be. It's exciting. I do think they've got a bit of a vibe going on there at the minute. And that's why I feel like it can be used a bit more just generally, because someone like him, and like you say, the McCrackens give it that real credibility as well, but someone like him, boxing's always been cool. I mean, that's always been one of our strengths, isn't it? You're looking about films that are made about boxing, for example. Boxing is cool, but it needs to be the right kind of cool, and it maybe needs to kind of modernise whenever it can. And someone like him, I think, can kind of help with that. Yeah,
I mean, we spoke about this, and something I said to him a couple of years ago when we first met, like you hear like musician wants to get involved in boxing, you think, fucking hell, what's this going to be like? What's this person going to be like? But you mentioned there, it's kind of like taking a daily interest, multiple times a day, kind of checking in and making sure they have everything. Obviously, Spider went on to GB for a bit, now he's turned pro. Jaykae kind of advised him through all of that. I mean, it looks as though the profile building has gone well. There's a number of tickets in there. Loads of tickets. You had Hearn giving it the inshallah in the post-fight interview as well. So I think it all kind of went off pretty well. Chris, did you catch his debut?
No, I missed his fight.
It's only 90 seconds, Chris. You could have gone and watched it.
I should have, and I will, because I heard good things. I watched the Princess Brum, and that was very interesting. Nice insight into that, and it seems like a talented lad, but it was bath and bedtime, Nick. So it is big Frank takes precedent.
That's his son, Frank, not Frank Warren. But anyway,
or Tommy Frank.
Yeah, or Tommy Frank. Okay, so let's move ahead and talk about this weekend. The unified heavyweight champion of the world, Oleksandr Usyk, returns in. Kind of mentioned there, Andy, about elite amateurs and never really having to box at home, obviously for very different reasons. He's not able to box in Ukraine, but Wroclaw, I'm sure if I've mispronounced that, you will correct me. And a certain Daniel Dubois, of course, former gym mate of you, Chris, is in the opposite corner, looking to produce what would be a seismic upset and claim 3 of the 4 major heavyweight titles. Straight off the bat, Andy, who's going to win?
Oh, you have to make Usyk a heavy favourite. The common sense dictates that, and I don't think anyone in the Dubois business would be offended by that, because, I don't need to explain why. Usyk is he's an overwhelming favourite, but I was down at the Bermondsey Boxing Club last week. Andy was there, Andy Purawal for Boxing News, and there was a few press, but not loads. It was just quite a low key open workout for Daniel with Don Charles, and Hamza Shiraz was there. Frank was there, Frank Warren. So I had a bit of a chat with him, and they look like they're in a really good place with it. They know that people don't really expect a lot. That can work. Most fighters generally that I've spoken to prefer the role of underdog if they have to choose, because it is less pressure, and all the pressure is on Usyk, and there's not really any signs that he's not going to be able to handle it, because this will be a home fight for him. Basically, I think there's a couple of 100,000 Ukrainians in Wroclaw, and the stadium will be full. I think it's about 40,000. You know, I'm going over at the end of the week. I know you're going during the week, but bizarrely aren't staying for fight night.
Yeah, no,
but
I'm not going.
I'm going towards the end of the week, and I can't wait. You know, it's exactly the kind of away trip that you really, really enjoy, because it's going to be unusual. But with Dubois, you can't say that he's got no chance. You know, someone like him does always have a chance, and I know that people get tired of cliches sometimes, but he can punch really hard. And it's not like Usyk is impossible to hit. People talk about him as being this guy this kind of will-o'-the-wisp, like trying to hit smoke. But he's kind of not really like that in reality. So who knows? I mean, I would just love to see Dubois do well and just come out of the fight stock raised, with it having been a positive experience for him, whichever way it goes. And I feel like that's achievable. But it's, I mean, were he to win, you know, it's Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson territory, really, isn't it?
It certainly would be, and we'll kind of come on to that a little bit later. But you mentioned there about how hard he punches. Chris, you have first-hand or first fist experience of that, sharing the gym with Daniel for a couple of years or so. He was with your trainer, Shane McGuigan. What was it like being in the ring with Daniel Dubois? What does he do well?
Yeah, I mean, I only sparred him, I think I sparred him once years and years ago, when he come in to spar Lawrence, and I jumped in for a couple of rounds, and then another time I jumped in when he first joined for a couple of rounds. So not a huge amount of experience, but I just remember being scared most of the time. But I think with Dan, I think he struggles with movers, and I think when it comes to moving, Usyk's pretty good at it. But like Andy said, Dan's always got a puncher's chance, because he does hit, you know, ridiculously hard. Remember Shane saying it on the pads, you could hear it on the pads, and I've seen him chin blokes in the gym numerous times. So yeah, there is a puncher's chance, especially in 10-ounce gloves. And like Andy said, Usyk's not unhittable. Breeders hit him clean quite a lot. Hunter was hitting him clean, but they are also good, very highly skilled cruiserweights who let their hands go in. Usually it's like the third punch, it's the first punch, and then they don't really get hit again. Whereas obviously Dan's quite traditional in the way he fights. It's usually off a jab or a double jab, and then the backhand comes in. And I don't think you can do that with Usyk. I think you've got to mix your shots up and throw in a different sort of rhythm. Because if you've got a predictable rhythm, it's just going to read you all night. And that's the same with what happened with Anthony Joshua. He's got the same rhythm, you know, maybe throw a lead right hand now and again, or feed it out. But it's everything's off the jab, and you almost can't do that against Usyk. You've got to keep the variety, you've got to keep the shots coming from different angles, different combinations. You can't just throw your standard combinations of one jab, 1-2 hook, or double jab, right hand, left hook, and you can't do that against him because he's way too smart for that. So you've obviously got to make Usyk a massively heavy favourite. And it's obviously not the fight we want to see. We want to see an undisputed heavyweight title fight, but it's an interesting fight nonetheless. But yeah, you base it off previous, most recent performances, and you're going to make Usyk a massive favourite.
You mentioned there about movement for Daniel, and that's something that he struggles with in the time. I think for me, the big kind of disparity here is between the ring intelligence, the IQ. Oleksandr Usyk, of course, one of the most decorated amateurs of his and indeed any generation, as well as all of his exploits as a professional. Does Daniel almost need to kind of not switch his mind off, but go in there and just kind of, I tweeted the other day, to try and make it a 4-round fight. Go there, try and let his hands go. Because I feel like the longer the fight goes, the more Usyk is in there with him, the more data, the more information he's able to gather, and the better he'll be. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. Unless you're going to break him down by drilling him to the body and taking first 3-4 rounds of wearing him down to the body, because it doesn't matter how tough you are, how east of Europe you're from, you body shots take their toll. And that's the only other way to beat him. But I don't think that's Dan's fight. I think Dan's fight is to go in there, hit everything, anything, hit his arms, because his guard's high and tight, but you can have seen people punch through it. They find the shots, so just hit his shoulders, just punch his shoulders, punch anything, just hit that target, which is easier said than done because he's constantly stepping back. But yeah, just hit something and just keep hitting something for 3-4 rounds, because then if it does go into the second half of the fight, you've taken a lot out of him, even if you've taken a lot out of yourself. You're trying to take more out of your opponent when it's going long than you are taking out yourself, and eventually the arms will drop, and hopefully you'll then be able to start hitting the actual target and what's gonna knock him out. But yeah, he's got to just hit something all the time. You can't be dropping back and fiddling around with the lead hands. We saw that in the Joshua fight. You know, he tried to out-intelligence him and it just doesn't work. Go and bully him, be the bigger man, which you are. Lean on him, punch his shoulders, punch anything, punch his forearms, punch his gloves, anything. Just keep him constantly tiring him out by hitting him. Just that constant thud is what I would say if I was in his corner.
Andy, we've spoke about it, haven't we, previously, about the way to knock somebody out. And Andy, if you haven't been watching all of our episodes of the boxing shows, writing a book about knocking people out. So keep an eye out for that one.
There's no first-hand experience involved in that.
That's okay. He's literally going around knocking people out himself and then telling everybody about
Basically, he's trying to figure it out and then he's going to do it.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
Write a book.
Yeah.
That's the ending.
I'm going to invite myself down to the gym in Leighton, near where I live, and just go, right, okay.
Right, you've taught me everything you know.
CBS, come on.
But we've spoken about kind of what Chris has just said. They're really about breaking a fighter down or catching them with a shot they don't see. In this fight, both of those instances seem difficult to imagine because of the level of Oleksandr Usyk. It's going to be difficult to set a trap and catch him with a shot that he doesn't see coming. And in the same vein, kind of what I said initially, really, about breaking somebody down and kind of chipping away at somebody like Usyk without him figuring out what you're doing and adjusting and changing tact. It seems very difficult to imagine in this fight.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's really interesting talking to fighters about the knockout. Basically, this incredible moment in sport where no other sport has anything like it. People could talk about last-minute goals or baskets on the buzzer and all that kind of thing, but it's not the same because it's just this. It's more than an equaliser. People describe it as that, but it just changes everything in a split second. And talking to people, one thing that everybody agrees on is that if you get hit with one that you don't see, that you're not braced for, anyone can go. Anyone can go. There is no such thing as a person who cannot be knocked out. There are people who haven't been, like Froch is one I'm looking at in the book, for example. But I spoke to him about it, and he said, "Well, of course I could be. That'd be mad to suggest that I couldn't be." Hay was the same, and Hay's the kind of guy who you might think would have that kind of braggadocio about him that, I can't be knocked out. And he was just like, yeah, of course I could be knocked out. You have to be realistic. So it's not impossible that he could catch Usyk with one that he's not braced for, and obviously he punches hard enough that if that happens, then he could absolutely turn his lights out. But that's going to be a really difficult thing to do. You think about the amount of one-punch knockouts like that you see at the elite level, and there aren't many. There really aren't many. And the other type, like you say, is deep in the fight. Resistance levels are low. You've probably been hit with bigger shots earlier in the fight, and then someone gets put away with just like a nice straight left or right hand if you're orthodox or southpaw. But again, you've got to take him there to be able to put that into effect. So whichever way you look at it, it's a massive ask. And I mean, he's got to be brave, hasn't he? Because if you're going to try and knock somebody out, you're looking for the finish, you put yourself in more danger of getting knocked out. It's as simple as that. If you commit to that, that's the payoff. And that's what you have to be kind of slightly fatalistic about almost. But it's just such an easy thing to say. Just go in there and gamble and roll the dice and jump on him and see what happens, because it's easy to say if you're not the one who has to do it.
especially against Usyk.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We had to endure
you can't just step into the middle of the ring, can you, Chris? Against not just him, like any good fighter, but particularly someone like him, and just start swinging away. I mean, you'll get absolutely slaughtered if you do that.
Well, we had 2 fights of it, didn't we? We had 2 build-ups to the Anthony Joshua fight. Certainly the second fight. I mean, the first fight was probably a little bit more bearable rather in the build-up. But the second fight of kind of get in there, rough him up, the old AJ, it was just kind of like back of a fag packet stuff, wasn't it?
Well, it's what people used to say about Mayweather, wasn't it? Oh, you need to make him uncomfortable. You think, these people are incredibly comfortable being uncomfortable. That's what your gig is, isn't it? You've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah,
particularly those guys who are in the top however many percent. Right, playing devil's advocate, I'm not quite gonna make the case for Daniel Dubois. I'm gonna stop short of that. But Oleksandr Usyk, he's 37 in January. He's boxed. This will be his 5th fight in his last 5 years. In the last 5 years of his career,
pretty amazing, isn't it? Really,
when you consider his activity. I mean, I think a lot of fighters who entered the World Boxing Super Series. I mean, obviously at the time you think about the money, but the activity level against the top fighters in the world is invaluable. And particularly, I mean, no one could have foreseen COVID afterwards. So banking those, 3 fights, if you won the tournament or you got to the final against top opposition, really was a blessing. I don't think anybody realised how much until, COVID happened and no one could box at all. But Chris, for anybody, I mean, Oleksandr Usyk is obviously a mercurial generational talent, but for any fighter, that's not ideal, is it? 5 fights in the last 5 years. He's had fights that he's wanted. The Fury fight obviously being the main one. It's almost a year or so, probably is about a year. They've been talking about that. They kind of famously started the negotiations before the Joshua rematch, which is the most...
back and forth on that's interesting, isn't it? With again, like Frank Warren and Alex Krassyuk. I was watching a little preview thing. Because obviously Dubois is Frank's guy as well as Fury, and they got into it, and no one's backing down on that front either as to why the negotiations broke down.
No, and it's not the fight that Oleksandr Usyk wanted. Of course, well documented, I say issues. What's happened in Ukraine is terrible. If there's a percent here and a percent there, I guess clutching at straws to rather than do a 10-minute preview of the fight and say we think Usyk's going to win, but it's not ideal prep for anybody, is it?
No, I was just thinking, when was the last time that Usyk even dropped someone?
He didn't drop Chaz Witherspoon, did he?
No, he didn't. He got stopped on his feet. Yeah, it would have been Bellew.
That was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's got to give you hope from Daniel's point of view. Look, he's a heavyweight. He can punch. But if you've got a half-decent chin, you've sometimes got to take that risk. And that's going to play into Daniel's hands if he can think like that. If you're too cautious of getting hit against someone like Usyk, you can't do it, which I think Joshua looked a little bit at times, looked a bit too cautious, rather than sometimes, taking the CBS approach, just headbutt the punch and get your way in. Not that I would recommend that to any fighter, let alone Daniel against Usyk. No, but just being a bit braver, hands high, and just looking to smother a bit and then just punch off it and stuff like that. But that's you got to find those little wins. Like, okay, he hasn't dropped anyone's at heavyweight, so let alone recently, he's never dropped anyone at heavyweight, so he can't be that big of a massive puncher. Obviously, you don't usually think about that and go, well, oh yeah, but you've got to do that if you're Daniel in this fight. You've got to take that little go, almost maybe even just he's not a puncher, and just go in there and hope for the best, and that he doesn't get caught too clean, and he can just take a few shots. Or if he takes a shot early on, come back to the corner, go, you there? Are you right? He's like, yeah. Like, it was a decent shot, but I'm with it. It's like, okay, well, that's his best. Then that's going to give Daniel confidence, and you need to give him as much confidence as possible and get him on the front foot and just letting his hands go. And I think that's the sort of the biggest thing there with Daniel is take his age, take his inactivity, take all those little wins and all, and then that gives, like you said, playing devil's advocate in that case and giving Daniel a case to win the fight. If you're in his team, that's what you've got to be doing and making him believe, because the whole of media, not that Daniel's massively on social media or anything, but every time he has a conversation with someone who's interviewing him about the fight, they're going to be pushing, you're an underdog. Whereas you don't really, if I'm Team Daniel, I don't want to be doing that. I want to be, you're an underdog, but they don't see this, they don't see that, they don't. He's never dropped anyone at heavyweight. He's never done this. He's never done that. He's this old. He's only boxed 5 times the last 5 years, etc. You've got to play on that as much as possible to give Daniel that confidence to just go in there and let his hands go.
Do you think the fact that, and with respect to Daniel, him not being a thinking fighter, and I don't think many fighters think on the same level as Oleksandr Usyk, but do you think that could play into his advantage in this fight?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the time Dan's just his way of boxing is just it's almost like it's just a flow state, his own flow state, whereas sometimes you can think too much in the ring, and I've definitely been guilty of that in the past. You overthink stuff, you don't let your hands go, whereas if you don't think and it's just you just do what's programmed and it just flows, I think that's probably his best chance. Yeah.
Now, kind of taking my devil's advocate hat off, and I don't know what I'm just anyway. Sorry, it's been a long week. I'm all out of whack because I wasn't up till 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. But anyway, moving on. Daniel's last fight against Kevin Lerena, the elephant in the room, not Kevin Lerena, the fight. The fact that he was dropped early in the fight, obviously injury that we've kind of since not really heard an awful lot about, to be honest. You were in the gym, or he was in the gym around that time, or certainly still affiliated to the gym. That's got to be a huge concern. Not only the fact that he was dropped, but I mean, if there's one fighter, certainly at heavyweight, I mean, Fury probably the other one, that you don't want to have any kind of niggling injuries or thoughts about any kind of, am I fully fit? Am I healed? Probably Oleksandr Usyk.
Yeah, for sure. But I think there's positives to take from Dan, because he'd never really hit that much adversity in a fight and come through it. There's always there's adversity, but he didn't come through the fight with a win. But he hit some adversity and come through it with a win, which is part of being a fighter, and that's that mental strength and that metal you've got to have going into big fights. You've got to have that behind. Yes, you could look at it like, I got dropped, or you could look at I got dropped, got up with pretty sure it was his ACL that was fully gone, by the way, and he still got up and won the fight. Not many fighters win a fight with an ACL injury, let alone, most fighters probably don't box on with an ACL injury. So the fact he got up and listened to Shane, all his weight went onto his front foot because it was his back leg that went, and found the shot. And it was a nothing shot in terms of he wasn't thinking, wasn't trying, didn't have much weight behind it in terms of it didn't propel off his back leg because he couldn't. He just threw it and dropped him with that right hand. That's positives going into this fight for me. Obviously, providing the injury has healed properly. Yeah, it's not ideal, but from what he came back in the gym very briefly after that fight, did a session with Shane, and he was rehabbing and everything, and before he left, and he was saying it was all good, and he was pretty sure he was back running then as well, or starting to run. So I'm sure that injury's all fine now. I hope so, because you don't want to have that, like you said, lingering over you. So if that is all fine, then there's positives to take from the Lerena fight.
Andy, we kind of at one of the red lights on the Fury Usyk negotiation saga, as it were, we spoke about, and I guess it's been one of the running themes in the build up to this fight, is Daniel's kind of credentials and his, does he deserve the fight? That has been a big theme around it. He is, of course, a WBA regular champion, for what that's worth, which has seen him get this shot. But obviously a fight that you can't turn down, fighting for 3 world titles against one of the best fighters in the world. I'm sure he's being paid very well for the fight as well. But ideally, could he have done with another one, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. But it is just exactly what you described. You get the opportunity and you can't possibly say no to it. I also felt there were plenty of positives to take from that experience against Lerena. People jumped on him a bit after that and questioned the stoppage and all sorts of other things, and that's fine. People see what they see and they make their own judgments, but I felt the ability to kind of get through that and not completely panic was pretty impressive, actually, because it's very counterintuitive to all of a sudden have to adjust and box in a way which you've never done before, because that lightning bolt starts in the right foot, doesn't it? And he's a massive puncher. So I thought the there was a lot to be taken from that win. Does it set you up to box Usyk? No, but then you could argue what does. When would you be ready for that kind of thing? And I think what Chris was saying is right. You reinforce with him all the things that he does well, and just lay out some facts. He hasn't stopped anyone at heavyweight. Fact. You are bigger than him. Fact. You punch harder than he does. Fact. These are all facts. And if he can just have a little bit of success early on, and I don't even mean rocking him or hurting him, but like you were saying, landing, feel something on the end of your glove. That's what all fighters need, isn't it? There's nothing more demoralising than just hitting thin air. So I think that's where they just have to take him, and I think Big Don is the guy for that. Don Charles, actually, seeing him with him in the gym the other week, he's very encouraging and kind of nurturing Don. He's not squeamish at all, and he will give him every chance in there. He's not going to yank him out of there too soon. I don't get the feeling at the weekend necessarily. He's got that mix, I think, that you kind of need, but. Also, he does kind of come across as being quite kind of like naive, Daniel, in some ways, doesn't he? But there are circumstances in which that can work. Like if he feels like he has hurt him a little bit, and someone else might be a little bit hesitant, oh, haven't I? He'll just steam in, won't he?
It's kind of what I was saying about, not overthinking things in the fight,
exactly,
and how that can be a bonus to him.
It can be. I think it definitely can be a heavyweight, because the potential repercussions, like I said, for really committing are severe. You could get mercilessly chinned. And like I say, it's an easy thing to say that that's how you're going to go about things, that you're happy with that roll of the dice. But, when you're the one who actually has to do it, it's a big ask. It's a very challenging mentality. And people will always look at what happened against Joe Joyce and ask questions. But, that was a pretty extraordinary thing to happen to someone still quite early in their career. What do you do? I think he'd probably handle it differently if it were to happen again. But at the time, I wasn't inclined to be too hard on him. People always want to know, did he quit or didn't he quit? It's very binary. But for me, I'm kind of... I don't have a problem with a situation where I look at it and think, yeah, he did quit, but I can see how it happened, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he will next time. But people kind of like, it's like, you're a quitter and you always will be. That's what people want to do, but I don't think that's not real life, is it? You live and you learn.
Absolutely.
Especially at that age.
Yeah, particularly against somebody so experienced in Joe Joyce. And we mentioned it briefly with Dennis McCann. We've spoken about it until the cows come home with pretty much every prospect who hasn't had that senior amateur experience. But remember the build up to that Joe Joyce fight with Kayotaro Fujimoto, Ebenezer Tete, and who's the other guy? Richard Lartey. Remember him? He was interesting. That wasn't necessarily the right build-up, and he faced adversity, as you mentioned there, and wasn't able to get the win from it. But I agree with what both of you have said about the Lorena fight, in a sense of, because it did look as though, particularly when he went down, obviously he went down from the initial shot, but then when he went down a couple of times after that, you kind of feared
under no pressure.
Yeah, and you sort of feared the worst.
They weren't knockdowns, no. And the referee would have said to him, because I remember having a similar with Sam Hyde a while ago, and the referee would have said to him, you can't just keep going down or I'll stop the fight and you'll lose because, you've been injured. It's no fault of his that you've been injured, and it'll be, you'll essentially have retired through injury. So you've got to stay on your feet.
Yeah, that was when Sam Hyde's knee went.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, yeah. And in the end, he went to the ropes. But, Daniel managed to keep the technique together, and those boxing mechanics are there whereby he could just keep throwing that straight right hand without putting pressure on that back leg, and I thought he was quite. Yeah, I thought it was impressive. And on the kind of quit thing, we a recent one, Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia. Did Ryan Garcia quit against Gervonta Davis? I would say yeah, he did, but I understand how it happened, and it doesn't necessarily mean that did he do it again. Yeah.
It's always a big topic, isn't it? Always a very interesting topic. Just want to touch on the change in trainer. Of course, now Don Charles, formerly Shane McGuigan, your trainer, Chris. Right fit for Daniel? I mean, just touching on what Andy said there. I mean, Don is sort of a man motivator, isn't he? We've seen him in the past have a very close relationship with his fighters. Doesn't seem to be somebody who does overcomplicate things to a great extent. Do you think it's a good fit for him?
Yeah, I think so. I think I really like Don. We've done lots of sparring with his fighters over the years. Shane gets on well with him. And Shane doesn't get on with everyone in boxing. But no, it's. I think so. I think Don's a good guy, and he's to the point. He's not complex in necessarily the way he coaches, but he speaks well about boxing when you speak to him about certain situations and certain fighters, whether that's his own or other fighters, and also, and also, but he's just to the point, and he'd say it as it is, and sometimes I think that's what people need. I think that will suit Dan. Just getting him to do the things we've said, making it the sort of fight they want to make it, and Dan following the instructions, and just giving it a go, which is not the sort of way you think as a boxer is like, oh yeah, I'll go and give it a go, but it's kind of what he's got to do, and then there's not too much finesse about it or complicated game plans. Don't try and unlock the Rubik's Cube. Throw the Rubik's Cube on the floor enough times and make it break. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what he's got to do.
What type of character is Daniel? Because the only kind of real insight that we get into him really is from 5-minute interviews where he's got a camera shoved in his face, and I don't think really many people give their the best account of themselves, so to speak, in those situations. You shared a gym with him for a couple of years, so he seems to be kind of this brooding character. Doesn't really say an awful lot. What type of character is he?
Yeah, he wasn't in the gym. He'd come in the gym, train, and he'd leave, and that was it. And was never coming for coffees or anything like that. It was, it was very much his boxing is a process and just his life. And I admire that to an extent where I've got to do my run, I get up and do my run, go to the gym, train, go and do my strength, whatever. And that's sort of how he lives it. So but I had a few conversations. He's a funny guy. As a personality where you can, you have a joke and a laugh with him. But yeah, I never really had huge amounts of conversations with him. A lot of time I was in last out of the group and he was in first, because a lot of time he'd get his training out the way. And that's the way Shane scheduled it. So, because maybe he had a session elsewhere which wasn't local to the gym. So yeah, I can't give too much of an insight because I don't know him, that well at all. I haven't had loads of conversations with him. All the conversations we ever had were about boxing, and he very much eats, sleeps, breathes boxing, which is, endearing in a sense, because that's just all he knows and all he wants, and I admire that.
Andy mentioned earlier on that it's not necessarily the fight that we're all kind of baying for, I guess, in the heavyweight division. That is, of course, Tyson Fury versus Oleksandr Usyk. Tyson Fury is boxing or fighting or whatever he's doing with...
Have you checked out At Home with the Furies yet on Netflix? I haven't.
I have.
Thoughts?
Mia was like, well, do you want to watch this? And I was like, go on then, it'd be interesting. And it's actually really interesting because I can relate to some of the stuff going on in his head, which might be a bit concerning for my wife. But she can relate with Paris as well, because it's not easy being a boxer's wife. He's obviously got, these mental illnesses, but I think maybe all boxers have this sort of just this up and downness that comes with the sport, and the mood swings, and it just happens, which just everyone experiences. So it's an interesting insight into the boxer's world,
Yeah, I'm going to watch it, I think.
I think it's
9
definitely worth a
episodes.
watch.
My dad was on to me about it the other day. He said, you're going to watch this? I couldn't believe it. Like, he doesn't really follow boxing. But I did see some quotes from Tyson at one point over the weekend where he was saying that once they got into the process of filming, he kind of wanted to get out of it.
Yeah.
And he couldn't, because obviously these contracts will be watertight. Anyway, it's got no great bearing on what we're about to talk about. But
no, for Andy and Chris's full review of At Home with the Furies.
We'll do our own Fury boxing show, me and Andy.
Yeah, there you go, mate.
After this, you can leave and we'll have a chat.
I mean, I'm all for it. You have to pay for the studio, though. But the fight that we are, of course, waiting for in the heavyweight division is Tyson Fury versus Oleksandr Usyk. I think it's fair to say that we all expect them to come through their respective fights. Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou, and of course Oleksandr Usyk this weekend. Do you think we get it after then, Andy? I mean, you're kind of our Saudi correspondent now. You've done a couple of shows out there. He's basically Saudi Arabian.
me and the Big K.
You and the Big K and Big A. Do you think we get it next? Do you think we finally get it? It seems as though, I don't know. It seems as though we're not very close to it happening. No, it doesn't feel like it, does it? Like,
it doesn't. I don't know. It's. I know that obviously Usyk is side with skills challenge. So this is a skills challenge show at the weekend. So I'm pretty sure I'll see some of the guys over there and maybe have time for a quick chat. I think Ziyad's on the card. Ziyad Al-Mayyouf.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
So he's always good to watch, actually. I always enjoy seeing him. So maybe we'll get a bit more over the course of the week or at the weekend. But it doesn't really feel like it's that close, to be honest. And one thing that seemed like it was nailed on almost was Joshua Wilder, and all of a sudden now that doesn't really feel like it's that.
2 fights in between.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's that close either, because originally it was December and they're talking about the double header, then January, and now I'm not sure that is going to be the next one. I think it must have been a very interesting kind of process for Skills Challenge since they become a promoter, because they've got the finance there to make all these big fights happen, but it's not as simple as that. And then when you throw that into the mix, and we mentioned this last week as well, is that it does help having the mega money to be able to put these fights together, but it also can be a bit of a hindrance, because then all of a sudden no one wants to do anything unless they're getting paid fortunes. And Fury still found a way to get paid fortunes in Saudi without boxing Usyk. And that's a problem, because who wouldn't do that? You know, you do that. You go and fight Francis Ngannou, wouldn't you, for a potload of cash? And there's no active fighter who wouldn't do it. So I think we said that at the time, that you can't. You know, it's more of a don't hate the player, hate the game type scenario. But yeah, I don't really feel like any of that stuff is particularly close, to be honest.
No, and it's one of those things where with boxing, I mean, every so often, and it's becoming quite frequent in recent years. I think there was obviously examples beforehand, but you think about Heyman with PBC. Every few years, someone comes along with a boatload of money and they're going to change boxing. It's going to be game changed.
Just not that straightforward, is it?
No, we had it with PBC and Al Heyman. Don't be wrong, they're obviously flying, do very, very well, certainly not taking any shots at PBC or Heyman. Then we had DAZN a few years ago, probably doing slightly less well than PBC, certainly in the minute, but had a big boatload of money, going to do this, going to do that. Had a list of
fighters they really wanted to get.
$1 billion here.
They were all Heyman guys pretty much, weren't they?
Yeah.
He managed to keep them.
But it was all like, we're going to distort the market. And we've spoken about this in the past. Are you distorting the market, or is this just the market now?
Because there's always someone distorting it.
There's always somebody coming in with a boatload of money who's going to change it all, and they're going to become the UFC of boxing, which is a terrible idea, by the way.
Way back in the day, there was this guy, Harold Smith, from Muhammad Ali Professional Sports. There's a great book about it called Empire of Deceit. If people are interested in that, and he turned up and he was just throwing money around. You know, he had black leather pillowcases full of cash that you would take to give to fighters, and putting together these mega cards and stuff. You know, there's always been someone.
Yeah, and it's because there's no barrier of entry, and money is number one in boxing. But it's not everything. Which politically, I think maybe the Saudis are potentially finding out now, where you've got
it must be quite a weird realisation, that too, because you'll have had everyone telling you that this is the ultimate money talk sport, and then you just think, well, that's great because we've got loads, and then all of a sudden that's not enough.
Well, you've got 4 fighters. So you've got Usyk's now skill challenge in K2. Don't know what's going on with Wilder. There was talk about him already signing with skill challenge, maybe
That's what we were all basically assumed when we saw him there in February.
You got Joshua on a lifetime contract with Matchroom, broadcaster with DAZN,
but he's got it on his. He's got
skill challenge on there. So but then you've got Fury, who kind of dances to the beat of his own drum, always has. You've got their respective networks, their respective promoters. Everyone within that has their own agenda. And this is always something that I always try and kind of speak to people about when it comes to making big fights, and the fact that people just assume that, as great as they were, the 4 kings were jumping in the ring with each other every couple of months for 50 grand each. Took Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard 5 years to make their fight, because eventually someone in this massive pie that everyone has to be satisfied goes, I don't like that, change that. Otherwise everything comes apart. And maybe that's what we're seeing now. Maybe it's just that the money, yes, is, I'm sure, the most important determining factor, but it isn't everything. And you're always going to find people with their own agendas, with their own kind of business at the forefront of their mind, which is just the same as you'll get with any other business, which is why I think potentially we are seeing that with Anthony Joshua now, where it's a case of, okay, he goes and fights Wilder, he makes a load of money, but if he gets knocked out in 2 or 3 rounds, what comes after that? We've got a lifetime contract with this guy. He's lost 2 of his 4 fights on a different platform. His last couple of fights have been Jermaine Franklin and Robert Helenius. We need to make some money back off this.
Yeah, it's exactly the same with Fury. Like, you get paid X amount, but then what is your value after you lose? Like, especially with Fury, because his value is all in being unbeaten. You lose to Usyk, and it's like, for no matter how much money, but then even if you have a fight after that, which you probably will, whether it's an exhibition, but how much you get paid for that? Yes, he's a character, but like all of that, like over the space of 5 years, is probably worth the same amount, whether he has the Usyk fight. If he has the Usyk fight and loses, or he has all these easy fights, the Ngannou, then he fights, I don't know, Logan Paul in a wrestling match or whatever. Like, it's all worth the same amount of money probably.
But
like,
one has a lot more risk than the other.
Yeah, exactly. And legacy, like, you really nowadays, you're not like, I think he'd rather have his legacy as, oh yeah, but he never boxed Usyk. And do you know what I mean? But he was still unbeaten.
But you can say, but I boxed Wilder 3 times. I beat Klitschko. And I did this.
Exactly. Like his legacy's not going to get completely ruined. Yes, he could completely solidify it by beating Usyk, and that's it. But then there will be someone else who he should have waited around for. Probably.
It's the sport, isn't it?
It's the sport. Like it's the way it works. Joshua knocks out Wilder, and then he doesn't fight Joshua, and it's like, well, Joshua would have beaten him, like, because he knocked out Wilder in less time than Fury did or whatever. In that case. But yeah, I think it's the value of a Netflix show, like, that loses all its value if you go away and lose. Like, if you've got a loss in this sport, unfortunately, it ruins your legacy, it ruins your paycheck as well. So although that paycheck, what was he asking for last time? $500 million.
Well, it depends on what. It depends on what day you catch him on. But
but he was asking obviously for $500 million or whatever. But like in the documentary, actually, it was quite a good insight, because he's pretty miserable, and then all of a sudden he's like, right, I'm fighting November 12th, which we know he doesn't. He fights December against Chisora. Haven't got that, but yeah, Mia doesn't know. She can't remember.
Got an exciting twist coming for you.
But
it's going to be Chisora. She'll be like, no, it ain't. That'd be silly.
But yeah, and then but his mood completely changes in it, which is an interesting insight into this conversation, because he has to fight. He has to fight. So he will continue fighting. The Ngannou, he's probably got him excited again for his own mental well-being. He loves to fight and be in training camp and etc. But does he want to have a training camp just to fight, or does he want a training camp where he's got to actually think about the opponent and devise this unbelievable game plan or whatever you want to beat Usyk? It's not as quite like that for Fury, because he's his own sort of paradox to unlock, and a lot to figure out with him. But it's a thinking fight. And can he be bothered for that, for a little bit more money? Probably not.
Yeah, again, as anything in this sport, it comes down to risk versus reward, doesn't it? I'm quite sure that Tyson Fury is 100% convinced that he beats Oleksandr Usyk. I'm quite sure of it.
Yeah.
As most fighters are.
Yeah, and no one's scared of anyone
No,
either.
no.
We say that quite often, don't
but
we?
if he's going to get 20 million to fight Chisora, and he's going to then get 30 million to fight Ngannou, maybe more. I mean, I don't know, that's the type of fight you could get. Like, I don't know the commercial aspect of it, but that's the type of fight where it does have genuine crossover appeal. This doesn't do anything for me, and I guess it doesn't do anything for you two either. But there are a lot of people. If he lands? But there are lots of people who will see that, won't they? They'll see Francis Ngannou starfishing wrestlers. And they'll go, but if he hits Fury with that Fury got, I mean,
not like Wilder did.
No,
you know what I mean,
no,
it's not
yeah,
like
exactly.
Wilder
That
had
he
a
can't
massive
punch.
right hand that he lands
But
clean.
Then you've seen, haven't you, like with the Ngannou, the hardest punch ever recorded at the UFC Institute. You probably just
I haven't been there yet.
I was going to say, don't have any boxers down there.
But
he can make his money, can't he?
Yeah, and I find Joshua interesting these days as well, because I think he's definitely. It's been an incredible ride that he's been on, and I think I said this last week, but around the Franklin fight, he was talking about how he's just doing this for himself now. He's done it for other people in the past, and what really people didn't seem to really appreciate it too much. And I felt at that point back in April, he was kind of quite wounded by it all still, and maybe he is a little bit still, but I felt during the week before what ended up being the fight with Helenius, it seemed to me like he got to a place where he was kind of okay with the fact that whatever he does, he's going to get criticised, and so just don't listen to it. Which, if you're him, you would just think to yourself, so you've all decided I'm going to fight Wilder, but I decide if I fight Wilder or not. And like Chris said, if you fight Wilder and lose, then we're all basically just going to write him off, aren't we?
Also, the thing with Joshua now, and it's a conversation that I had a few months back with someone, where it was a while ago, like, fucking hell, it's August, Jesus. Anyway, it was nearly a year ago, where we were talking about the Tyson Fury Anthony Joshua fight, and at the time, the Wilder fight was it was put in a box, never going to happen. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen in 2018 or 19 or whatever. But if you lose to Fury, then the pot of gold then becomes Dillian White, really, because there's no other fight out there. The Wilder fight, all the politics, push that to one side. Whereas if you do the Dillian White fight, then you can always fight Fury, and there's always that pot of gold. The White fight, I would now be stunned if it ever comes up ever again, because of what happened a couple of weeks ago with Dillian White. So then if he does go and box Deontay Wilder and loses, okay, yeah, the Fury fight, I think the Fury fight will always be there, because people in this country would always want to see that fight. But it will take a massive hit. And then if that fight was difficult enough to make when there's piles and piles and piles of money everywhere, how easy is it to make once, if Joshua gets knocked out, or I'm not even going to go there with Fury and Ngannou, but you know what I mean. It makes it even more difficult to make. So do they... And again, it sounds like we're kind of making out that Joshua is the one that potentially would not want the Wilder fight. I think there's a lot of parties to satisfy in a fight of that magnitude. But considering what we saw against Helenius, and I think everybody thinks that he probably should have one more, whether or not he does or not. But from a business point of view, you're probably looking at that and thinking like, okay, well, the fights that we'd be able to command X for that will perform this well, we can only do that before a Wilder fight in case he loses, because then after that, it's not going to bring in this and it's not going to bring in that. So it's a difficult, I guess, conundrum, although admittedly one with tens of millions of pounds up in the air for all parties, Chris. It's one of those good problems, I think. Yeah,
it's not a bad problem. It's a problem I'd like to have. It is funny what people think you get paid. I was just at someone's the other day. I was with a group of people, and I was like, one of my brother's mates was like, yeah, you must be a millionaire now. It's just like, not even close. Unfortunately, I'd like to have that problem. But it's a weird situation, isn't it, with all the heavyweights at the moment, because Fury's the one. He's number one because of his status. Maybe he's made himself that by creating this status of him telling everyone he's number one. Yes, obviously he's beaten Wilder and Klitschko, but Usyk's also unbeaten, never looked close to really having much problem at heavyweight. With Joshua, he's been close fights at cruiserweight, but he beat everyone at cruiserweight.
And when cruiserweight was really, really
and he beat
not the soft division it is now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Giving world titles away willy-nilly nowadays.
Hey, at least I beat a champion.
There we go.
But yeah, no, it's like Fury's got this aura about him that he is number one, and everyone's got a fair play to him, in a way, because he gets everyone to play to his tune, and if they're not willing to pay him whatever money he's going to ask for, then he's not interested. Maybe they are willing to pay him that, and he's realised that okay, now they will pay me that, but actually I don't really want the fight or whatever.
Yeah, if they're going to pay me that, they'll probably pay me 50 more in 6 months.
Yeah, with Joshua, it's a difficult situation. Would I fight Wilder next? Probably not, based on my previous performances. Nothing there to show myself that in the ring that I'm going to be able to do it. It's very different when you've got that sort of live opponent in front of you like Wilder. It gives you that little bit extra in training camp. Maybe he's doing it in the gym and we don't see that. And it's a business. And yes, he's got plenty of money, but he's used to getting plenty of money. So why is he not going to just keep wanting to do the best business decision? Maybe fight a couple more times before the Wilder fight, and then that could be the roll of the dice where it's like, okay, plenty of money on the table, get some devastating knockouts in between, build the money up for that fight, plenty of money on the table, roll the dice as such at that stage of his career. If it doesn't go the way you want it, maybe still plenty millions in the pot to fight Dillian Whyte in his comeback fight from his 4-year ban.
They can fight him in 2027.
It's quite a closed circle as well, isn't it? Which kind of works for these guys because it's not like there's this kind of the next cohort of heavyweights. They're not breaking into that top four. Joshua, Fury, Usyk, Wilder.
It's kind of like,
it's like Wilder can't kind of think, right, well, never mind you, I'll move on and fight. It's not
like if Hrgovic could come, you'd like someone like a Hrgovic to be coming through and blasting his way through, but he's not.
Exactly.
There's no one like that doing that.
It's kind of like football when you have the big six, don't you? And that's the top six. Or I'm not a football fan, but
now it's just the top one, and everyone else is fighting for second place pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like there's not that crop enough at heavyweight, and that. It's a strange division.
Joyce looked like he could be that kind of disruptor, didn't he? Could still be if he beats Zhang in a rematch.
Which I think he will, but he's still now he's even more in the who needs him club. He's got does the win put him straight back in, beating Zhang, put him straight back into that sort of same ranking and stuff, and he can force his way that way. You don't know, but he's got that loss now, and it's like it's just lost that credibility, and that's just how it works.
Okay, well, before we wrap things up, there are a few heavyweights in action this weekend in America. So, Andy, we're going to come to you first for the return of Jared Anderson, fresh off a decision win over Charles Martin in a fight where I think it's fair to say he had more problems than we expected him to have, and certainly more problems that we've seen so far in his career. Returns against Andre Rudenko, still going strong. And I think... me personally, I think it just shows where maybe Top Rank are now looking at Jared Anderson with just dropping him back a little bit after a pretty, heavily hyped start to his professional career.
Yeah, it would appear so. And part of the reason for that could be what we were just discussing. They might look at the top end and just think, well, there's no real rush here because the fights that everybody wants to see we know what they are. So they can maybe take their time a little bit more with him. Rudenko... yeah, I remember seeing him fight Lucas Brown nearly 10 years ago.
He's been around the block and then some.
Yeah, he's been around for a long time.
He's had only 41 fights. He's only 39. I thought he was older than that. But anyway.
But you'd imagine he'll give him some rounds. He'll give Anderson some rounds. How many kind of depends on how up for it you are, basically, at that stage of your career, I think, how motivated you are to dig deep particularly if you find yourself needing to do that quite early on. But you're right, I think maybe they have not cooled on him but the top rank matchmakers who are pretty much the best out there, you would say, just know that they don't need to go full force with him just yet. I mean, I do find him interesting. I find some of the stuff he says quite interesting about wanting to be out of boxing by the time he's 27 or something like that.
Yeah, that viral clip with Roy Jones Jr., didn't he, before the last race, like crying in the ring about which, I mean, you know, whatever, it doesn't kind of give you much of an insight at that particular moment, I don't think. But then considering kind of the other comments that he's made about wanting to wrap up the sport early, and then he went into the fight afterwards, and it's kind of an uneven performance, and I don't know, we spoke about it afterwards, didn't we, where it was sort of, and we don't have president of the Jared Anderson fan club here today, Mr. Barry Jones, a big fan of Jared Anderson, where you kind of look at all of those things and you do wonder, like, and it is just the fickle nature of boxing, isn't it? He goes from being the future of the heavyweight division to is he that good in the space of, you know, 10 threes? Yeah,
but that's the name of the game, isn't it? That's what happens. And you know, it's interesting that Top Rank have got Jalalov now as well, and
who's also on that card.
Yeah, and they'll keep those two apart for forever until they've got world titles, probably, if that's what happens. But I think it's good that they've got him as well. You know, it's not a bad thing to have a stable mate. Yeah, well, it's great for the promoter, but if you're for the fighters, I think it's not a bad thing to have a rivalry. Because I mean, Jalalov's looked really good in everything he's done so far.
They've got Torres as well.
Yeah, Torres as well. Yeah,
the Olympics and the Worlds.
I watched that little half-hour show that Top Rank did on Torres. They put it out last week on, I think it's on Sky Boxing YouTube. It's good. You know, he's an interesting guy. So it is. Yeah, it's an interesting mix, but like I said, it's not like there's even that much potential for anyone yet at the moment to kind of burst through and be the sort of disruptor at the top of the division. So they can take their time a little bit more, but at the same time, you don't want anyone to stagnate or the interest in them to kind of cool, because taking him to Toledo, where he's from, you know, that was good. I'm bang up for that always, taking fighters, you know, get them set up in their hometown and
me too,
make them a name in their hometown. It's really important. It's really important. Crawford, you know, love to see him back in Nebraska, you know, next time he boxes. I used to love those Wilder fights down in Alabama. You know, it's great. All of that stuff is great. But yeah, he's going to beat Rudenko, isn't he?
Yes, I would imagine so, and in good fashion. Fan of Jared Anderson?
Yeah, you get overhyped, or everyone's bang average. It's one or the other, isn't it? In this sport, it's like, nah, they're right, or they're the next best thing, and then the next best thing until they're bang average, and they have a flat performance against Charles Martin, for example, in this case. But he's got to make a statement, I think, otherwise it just, you go from flat performance to a flat performance, and then it's like, well, we're not bothered. It's such a flippant sport where people just lose interest like that, and momentum is everything, and one flat performance and that's it. Like I said, you go from being guaranteed unified undisputed champion to not even winning a world title in 30 minutes 36 minutes, and that's just the way the sports and the critics work. I think, you know, people could sometimes go, well, yeah, it's a good learning fight, or hopefully they'll learn from this and things like that. And you never know where a fighter is in their personal life or their career or their mental state when going into a fight. And that, to me, is everything. Like, where they're at in their own life of how they're going to perform. That comes down to that. And some people can just use the chaos to fuel them through. But yeah, I think he needs to make a statement, Anderson. I think got ability. He's not massive, is he, at heavyweight? And I think
6'4".
Yeah, and I think that's gonna be his main problem, because he's not like he's an Usyk who's a mover and like really awkward. And I think that is where he's sort of caught in between that. Yeah, you know, in that size where he's definitely a heavyweight, but he's not big enough for your big heavyweights.
If you're going to be 6'4" nowadays, you need freakish athleticism. He's naturally athletic, and I think that's definitely part of his appeal. And I felt like I did think that Barry who I love and knows more about boxing than I will ever know, was a little. I think people were just a little bit excited about Anderson before maybe having the reason to do so. And I think the last fight could have been the right thing for him. I think we saw a lot in that fight against Charles Martin. He was following him around the ring, which made it easy for Martin. Martin lined him up with the left hand throughout the fight, hurt him a few times, almost knocked him out in the last round. And I think probably the most eye-opening part of his performance against Charles Martin was how easy Charles Martin was able to push him around the ring, and that physical strength and going back to that athleticism. So I don't think it was the worst thing for him, because he won the fight clear, and he had to show, plenty of bottle. He had to show a decent chin. Martin can punch. He's a big lump.
And Martin's been better recently than he was a few years ago. He's had some good performance.
He had a really good performance against Luis Ortiz. He dropped Luis Ortiz twice before getting hit with a big left hand. So I think that may have, because I remember speaking about it with Barry on one of the shows where he'd boxed Jerry Forrest, and he knocked Jerry Forrest out in 2 rounds, which on paper is a brilliant win. We actually watched the fight, and he kind of is swinging hell for leather at times and getting caught with shots that are coming back. And I think it showed the naivety of him. So I think it's good to just reassess where he is. I think he's still naturally bundles of natural ability. But maybe because there was talk of him, boxing one of the top boys in his next fight or 2 fights. We spoke about Yafai Ajagba as a potential fight. He's boxing this weekend against Jaykae, which is a really good fight.
Oh, that's interesting.
Really like that fight. We've mentioned it before, haven't we, about Top Rank and the way that they like to match their fighters. That will be a winner stays on.
Yeah.
The loser of that fight, I would expect probably not to be boxing on a Top Rank card in their next fight. But yeah, that's a really interesting fight as well. FHA, a really good card. I've just got it in front of me here. You've got Abdullah Mason, who's kind of anointed as the next one coming up. Jeremiah Milton, Jalalov, Bruce Carrington, Jared Anderson, Yafai Ajagba, Nico Ali Walsh. It's a good evening of boxing, Andy.
Yeah, it is. Carrington's a good fighter as well. And he was just so unlucky with the Olympics. But he's managed to get over that. But basically what happened was that there was no qualifying for the Olympics in the end in the Americas, and he was all set to be the guy who would go to qualifying, and you would have expected that he would have qualified, and who knows what he might have done, but because there wasn't any qualifying, it went to rankings, and Keyshawn Davis's ranking was still really good. So he ended up going. So that's the kind of thing where when you've been waiting, and he had, because he'd been on the team a long time, but he'd been waiting for his turn basically. Then when it comes to something like that happens, that is a kick in the ball sack, isn't it?
Really,
to be honest, but a lot of time, stuff like that is the making of fighters.
Yeah, there you go.
You go and win a gold medal and you just drop off. Like you see it.
You're still hungry.
A lot. See it a lot. You keep that hunger. It's happened. You see a lot of the top people, some of the best fighters ever. You look at Roy Jones with the robbery. You look at Mayweather with the bronze medal. Like. It happens, and it makes them so hungry, and then they just get this propels them even further. So hopefully for him, that's the same.
Holyfield as well. Holyfield knocked out my mate Kevin Barry after the ref call break. But yeah, okay, right. We have reached the end of today's offering. So before we wrap things up, it is prediction time. So we're going to start over with Mr. Andy Clarke, not working on the. Oh, you're going to be there, aren't you?
What if we talk sport?
That's all right. Talk sport's not serious. You can give me a prediction. Right. So Oleksandr Usyk versus. You can quote me on that. Oleksandr Usyk versus Daniel Dubois.
If I'm commentating on a fight, I'm happy to say who I think is the favourite, and Usyk is a very strong favourite, understandably so.
Is he a strong favourite to win by decision, or is he a strong favourite to win by stoppage?
By stoppage, I would say he's a pretty strong favourite.
Chris.
No, I'd say Usyk by points based on what we've spoke about. I've never really seen Daniel that late on in a fight other than sort of the Joyce fight, but he was still in that fight by the injury, and he wasn't actually miles behind the cards, and that was a long time ago. And also Usyk's not going to be hitting him with that jab as hard as Joyce was hitting Daniel. So yes, he may be hitting him with various shots, but I think all those factors come into play, and I think Usyk points is what I would call.
I'm going to go for Usyk by stoppage in the second half of the fight. I think somewhere around 8 or 9. I think he'll get to him. I think Usyk will come out, start, as we always see from him, start faster than we expect him to. For whatever reason, he still surprises us. Both Joshua fights was the same. Marched down to the middle of the ring and played the lead hand game. And I think he'll do the same with Dubois. Try and hurt him early.
I definitely feel like I think that is what he'll do.
Yeah. But I do think Daniel will go, and I think he will, where rightly or wrongly people criticise Anthony Joshua for not roughing him up, I do think Daniel will go there and try and let his hands go and try and impose himself on him. But I think that it may be a case of sort of mental fatigue, if anything, and just hitting and chasing shadows. And I think Usyk stops him, maybe around 8 or 9. And a fight that we've not even really discussed it to any great length, but it's a good fight, so let's see who we think is going to win. And Andy's not commentating, so he can give us a real prediction. Yafai Ajagba versus Jalalov Ajagba-Kossobutskiy.
It's not going the distance.
You wait your turn.
No, I would agree
Don't
with
care
that.
what belt you got.
I don't know, to be honest. I'll go for Ajagba. I'll say Ajagba. I was there when he boxed Frank Sanchez, and it was kind of quite a painful watch on his behalf. But no one wants to box Frank Sanchez, and there's a good reason for that. So I think he's still got some tools, Ajagba, and he really, really needs it. I know they both do, but he really needs it. So for that reason, I'll go for him.
Chris?
Yeah, it's a bit of a coin toss. Both punch, but I'll go. Is it Kossobutskiy? Kossobutskiy, yeah. I just a bit more schooled in terms of all-rounded, and can obviously punch.
Twin cost. There we go. But anyway, Jalalov Kossobutskiy, I'm going for. I think he beat Ajagba. I thought Ajagba was really poor against Stephen Shaw, who is not a good fighter with respect. Was stopped in his last fight as well, Shaw, on the back of that Ajagba performance. Ajagba made him look like Jersey Joe Walcott for 5 rounds. So I think Jalalov Kossobutskiy will win. It would not surprise me if he stops him, because I think Ajagba is too rigid. I thought he would be a great opponent for Joshua Ajagba if you prepare him for Wilder.
Yeah,
that's a great opponent. But I don't think he'll get to him. I think Kossobutskiy will do a bit of a number on Ajagba this weekend. I think Kossobutskiy is very, very good. But I'm looking forward to that card. Yeah, just running through some of the list on some of the names. And it's always good to see Jalalov box, and it's good to see him nailed down, top rank. He's our guy. Yeah. We're going to build him because he can really fight, and I think he'll be the one comes up from heavyweight and is the next one up.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance of that. I mean, I did kind of wonder about him a bit in the amateurs as to whether I wondered about him physically a bit. I remember standing next to him taking a COVID test in Belgrade in 2020.
Loves an away day, Clarke.
And this really does kind of illustrate what a strange man I am at times. But I was kind of turning around and just looking at him, just checking him out kind of physically. And I remember just thinking, God, he's got quite a slim waist. He didn't really have, he didn't really have any arse on him. And I just thought to myself, don't know about that for a heavyweight.
His heavyweights with a bit of arse on them.
I do, yeah, absolutely right, yeah. Heavyweights need to have a good solid arse on them, because that's where, and thighs too, ideally, because that's where, good base, and that's where the power comes from. But
he must have looked around and said, why is the guy from Sky Sports looking at my arse?
No, he did catch me. He did catch me. I was very careful about that. But
you wouldn't want that.
No, you definitely wouldn't want that. But he's just got really, really good basics, hasn't he? Really good basics.
Great feet. I think the feet is the big thing. I don't see anybody at heavyweight handling the feet.
It's so impressive the way he managed to go back to the amateurs and do what he did, because people like to look at stuff like that and say, oh, well, that's just an indication that, the people who don't know anything about the amateurs, they'll say that's just an indication that it's not all that great, and, if somebody can come back and do that. But he's the only person who's been able to do that. Others have tried it and come up short. And he was just unbeatable. And he's transferred it pretty effectively so far. How quick will they try and move him? That's the interesting thing with him, I think.
We spoke about it a few weeks ago. I don't know I can't remember what we said about it then, so forgive me if you did tell us. What's he doing now with the amateurs?
As I understand it, that's done.
Good.
It's finished. I did see him last December. He appeared at the Uzbek Nationals, and in the middle of the Uzbek Nationals, he nipped over to Abu Dhabi to boxing this IBA Night of Champions that I was covering, and then he went back to the Uzbek Nationals, won them because he needed to qualify him for the Senior World Championships, which were in Uzbekistan at the start of May. And originally he wasn't going to go to them, but then when it was in Uzbekistan, I just thought to myself, there's just no way that he's not going to do it. So he did, but as far as I understand it now, that's it. Like that is it now, because the qualifiers for Paris are kind of underway. He's done finally. Yeah, he's done it all. You know, he's done it all. So he needs to buckle down and just concentrate on being a pro.
I was sitting with a delicious Ori at the show on Saturday night, so he'll be pleased to hear that.
He will be. Yeah, everybody will. Yeah, everybody will, because I think he lost in. I think Jose Larduet beat him in like 2018 in WSB, and I don't think he lost a 3-round fight maybe since the World Championships in 2017, and I don't think he'd come particularly close to it either.
Jose Larduet's boxing now, isn't he?
Yeah, I always liked him. A bit of an Andy Ruiz type guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's like Odlania Solis. Like,
yeah.
We could go on all day and talk about Cubans and their habits. But anyway, thanks very much to you, of course, first of all, for watching and listening to us ramble for the last couple of hours. To Mr. Chris Billam-Smith, the current WBO cruiserweight champion of the world. Look forward to hearing what you have in store next. And, as always, Mr. Andy Clarke. No place he'd rather be on a Monday than sitting here at ID Studios. But from me, Rob Tebbutt, from our esteemed panel of guests, thanks very much for stopping by, and we'll catch up with you next time.